Okay, fantastic. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining SADAG's Parents Connect webinar today from 12 to 1. This is going to be the start of a conversation around a really important topic around teen depression and suicide prevention. We've just finished last week, which was Teen Suicide Prevention Week, and then this week having the matric exam results coming out and the start of a very rocky 2021 with schools going back online, disrupted, delayed. I think it's an important conversation to have, and at least to get the ball rolling on this conversation and this topic. So thank you very much to everyone who's joined us. And as a way of introduction, let me just quickly share the screen. Today, we really just want to be as interactive as possible, and in a world of webinar overload, just some webinar etiquette about please keep your mics on mute. We often hear shuffling and it can disrupt the speaker, but we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please post your questions, your comments, your insights in the chat box. We will be following it and we'll come to the questions at the end. You're welcome to keep your camera on if network allows. I know where I'm coming from at the moment on the East Rand, there's a storm that's brewing. So you might see me coming on and off. The webinar will be recorded and we will be sharing the webinar recording as well as the presentation slides with you in an email, normally a day or two after the session. So please know that you will be getting all the information today. I think just to quickly unpack what we're hoping to achieve in this 1 hour, and again, from myself, Cassie Chambers, the Operations Director at SADAG, I've been with the group now for over 15 years, and the topic of mental health actually needs to be spoken about for hours and hours and hours. But we have 1 hour to start the conversation, and this afternoon we're joined by educational psychologist Lucy Robertson, who's really going to help us to unpack teen depression, the signs and symptoms, what parents can do when you're in a crisis, how to help a teenager who is depressed, and how to start that conversation around depression. I'm going to come in at the back end with regards to suicide myths and the language we use, as well as if there's enough time to go through a suicide safety plan and how to get help. But either way, a Q&A session is really important, and I look forward to having all of your insights. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Lucy this afternoon, who's going to get us going. And I think for everyone else, I'm hearing some comments that there's not getting any sound. Sometimes logging back out and back in again could help with that. So if anyone else is having problems, let me know. But thanks to everyone who's been posting in the chat where you're coming from. It's so great to see people from all over, What's Pretoria, Cape Town, Joburg. We even have someone from Botswana. Welcome. Without further ado, Lucy, over to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Cassie, and welcome to everybody. It's so lovely to just see, as Cassie said, so many people from all over the country. And yeah, really the purpose of me sharing today is really just to highlight a few kind of pertinent areas related to teen suicide and depression. Cassie, I may overlap a little bit with what you might cover, but we can see how it goes. And yeah, so just to kind of highlight a few things, I've really tried to keep my slides to a minimum, because what I think we'd really like for today is, as Cassie said, discussion around this topic. And it's just wonderful to have other professionals, and we learn from each other. And I think I was reading something the other day about COVID and that, and they were saying, we really are in this together, and that's how we're going to get through this. And I think the same thing around topics like teen depression and suicide is collaborating and working together to help one another, navigate territory like this. So I'm going to share my screen with you, just so that you can have a look at my slides. So Cassie, maybe you can just give me a thumbs up if I'm okay. Good. Alrighty, so I'm just going to quickly run through a very basic presentation on teen suicide with you. And as Cassie said, my name is Lucy, and I'm an educational psychologist based in Randburg in Johannesburg. And a lot of my work is with children and adolescents in therapy. All right, so just a very brief outline of the presentation. We'll look at some levels, if you want to call it that, of suicidal behavior. And we'll go into some causes and risk factors, some common misconceptions or myths, signs and symptoms, then just some general ideas related to suicide prevention, then guidelines for helping a teen that expresses suicidal ideas, and then lastly, some helpful phrases that you might like to use if a teen in your community comes to you and shares that they are feeling suicidal. Then just a quote from a psychologist in the UK, John Hendon, who works a lot with suicidal clients, and he says, suicidal thoughts are a normal response by normal people to an abnormal set of circumstances. And I think there is some sort of a stigmatization around suicidal ideation or death by suicide. And it's just a good reminder that it can be quite a normal response to a very abnormal set of circumstances. And we'll go into what those circumstances might be. So just some thoughts on suicide. The call to suicide comes from psychological pain. So you often find when a teen, I'm speaking now specifically about teens, but this is across the board to humans, but when a teen starts to show you signs and starts to say things, whether it be verbal or non-verbal, because you'll see in one of the slides I mentioned that research shows that 93% of the time a teen will show non-verbal signs, and only 7% of the time they'll show verbal, they'll actually verbalize to you, I'm thinking of death, or they'll verbalize a preoccupation with death. So beneath that is very, very deep pain and a cry for help. And then a decision to kill oneself is made by a person who would not choose death as the answer if life provided better solutions. So in other words, that person or that teen that is feeling suicidal or has attempted suicide or is talking about suicide is feeling hopeless and helpless, and they within themselves are not sure of a better solution. And then lastly, suicidal people are motivated by the need to escape pain rather than a desire to die. So again, linked to the first point of there's a deep-seated root of pain that lies underneath suicidal ideation and behavior. So in just the 4 levels of suicidal behavior, if you will, is the ideation of suicide, so the idea and the possibility of suicide. Then you would have suicide-related communication, which would be when a teen, as I said, verbal or non-verbal, starts to communicate that there's an ideation of suicide. And we'll look at what those communications could be. Things like isolation, social withdrawal, a lack of motivation for tasks that were previously enjoyable, could be actual verbalizing things like I want to die or life is no longer worth living. Then the 3rd level would be an attempt at suicide. And the 4th, sorry, someone's got their mic on, if you wouldn't mind turning it off. And then the fourth level would be the actual completed act of death by suicide. I'm just giving you a chance to just take that in for a few seconds. Then look at some underlying causes and risk factors. So what I've done here is I've split it into three kind of domains, if you will: psychological, situational, and neurobiological. So psychological would be things like depression, okay, and other psychiatric disorders, very acute anxiety, things like that, other chronic mental illnesses, and emotional dysregulation. So that talks to an inability to find a balance of emotion and to kind of find, we talk about an optimal band of regulation where you feeling comfortable and okay. Life might be tough, but there's an overriding sense that a person is coping, okay? And an emotionally dysregulated person would either be on either extreme of feeling, they could be on an extreme high, or they could be feeling an extreme low. And it's an inability to kind of come into that middle band. Then hopelessness and perceived burdensomeness comes from a theory around suicide, where psychology is showing that when a person and when a team feels a sense of hopelessness coupled with being a burden, coupled with I don't belong, that those kind of three psychological aspects, if they are unchecked for long enough, can lead to death by suicide. And social alienation, which often comes from a low sense of belonging, and then perfectionism, or that sense of perceived underachievement and not being good enough. And I think that is quite a pertinent point related to the fact that the matric results have just come out, as Cassie was saying. And there is a sense, I think, for a lot of our matrics that my marks aren't good enough. And there's an inability to kind of see that last year was a very, very crazy year. And it's incredible that they managed to get through matric in a pandemic. But there's an overwhelming sense for some of our teens that I've underachieved and I'm not good enough. And this could be pressure that they're putting on themselves, or it could be pressure that's coming from external sources, parents, caregivers, the school. Then situational, we look at things like acute stress, which could be traumatic incidents, a hijacking, some kind of a crime that they've witnessed, an accident, an experience of shame. Then gender-related challenges. And this is something that is quite prevalent today, that many teens are grappling with their gender identity, and teens who might be identifying as trans or as bi, there is often a sense of not fitting in and of not knowing how to process their gender identity with trusted people. And this can often lead to feelings of hopelessness and being other if it's not processed and worked through. Then things like alcohol and drug abuse, the opportunity for suicide, if a teen spends a lot of time alone, if they have access to medication, for example, or other substances. And then again, the perception of underachievement. Then lastly, the neurobiological, looking at vulnerabilities to suicide and biochemical markers. So those are things like, very low dopamine or very high cortisol levels, stress levels. It can even link to the endocrine system, thyroid, pituitary gland, those sorts of things as well. Okay, but I'm going to move on because I want to try and leave a good amount of time for discussion. Just some basic common misconceptions around teen suicide is that talking about suicide is going to increase the probability that it will occur. And research has shown that that's not true, that providing an opportunity for teens to talk and communicate and ask questions is helpful and provides them with a safe space to bounce ideas off trusted people, as opposed to them internalizing their ideas around suicide and feeling that they don't have a place to talk about it. And often parents or caregivers are concerned that I don't want to put a spotlight on it because what I feed is going to grow. But in the case of suicidal ideation and links as well with depression, if you provide a space for a teen to talk and they know they've got a place to share, research shows that it does not increase the likelihood of them committing suicide. Then secondly, parents are always aware of suicidal behavior in their children. That's also not true. Children and teens are often very good at putting on a very, very brave face. And it's often your strongest people that are struggling with suicidal ideation because they have got to put so many compensatory mechanisms in place to present a front of I'm coping, I'm okay. And there's almost a sense sometimes when someone has made up their mind that they want to commit suicide, they almost find a sense of resolution. And so their behavior can be that of someone who is almost quite kind of resolved and I don't want to say at peace. That's not, well, maybe at peace with their decision. And then suicide in teens is mostly an impulsive act. It's not always impulsive. It can be very calculated and planned. Suicide attempts are attention seeking, and they are not always, and a lot of the time they're not. And that is why it is so important, and you'll see in one of my slides further on, that we never take a suicide comment or conversation or a non-verbal communication, we never take it as a joke or kind of dismiss it as being attention seeking. It's always something to take seriously and to talk about further. Then once a teen is intent on suicide, there's no way of stopping them. That's not always the case. There is hope, I think, for another intervention. And then suicide is hereditary. It's not, there can be mental illness that is hereditary in nature, and there can be genetic markers for that. But there's also a lot of other situational or environmental factors that play a role. And then that all teens with thoughts of suicide are depressed. That's not necessarily the case. Some and a lot of people who are suicidal are depressed, but not everybody who is suicidal is depressed. Okay, I'm not going to read through all of this for time's sake, but just some very kind of broad signs and symptoms. Things like a lack of motivation for tasks that were previously enjoyable, a change in sleeping habits, either sleeping a lot or not sleeping at all, a very marked change in behavior, be it very violent behavior, very erratic behavior, isolation from friends and family, very distressed and agitated, very reactive, a preoccupation with death. It might be seen in their speech. They might be talking a lot about death and dying. It could even be in the form of artwork. And I'm not talking about a once-off project or something like that. I mean something that you're picking up is recurrent, and could be even jokes around suicide, giving away prized possessions, etc. I'm just going to let you just absorb that for 2 seconds. Cassie will share these slides with you. Then some ideas related to suicide prevention, and I've touched on this earlier, is providing a safe space for teens to talk, okay? And this relates to depression as well, and allowing them to communicate without fear. So decreasing the shame around what they're feeling, okay? Encouraging open sharing and to listen without judgment. And I think this is difficult as parents, because as a parent myself, I know my natural response is to want to give advice and want to change and make something better for my child. But if as parents we can just take a step back and just hold, in psychology we often talk about holding space for our clients, and if you can just hold space for your child in a non-judgmental, affirming way, to let them know my door is always open, you can come and talk to me whenever you need to. And then not to impose ideas on them of you being rebellious, you being selfish, you're not thinking of anybody else, but to rather try and promote a sense of connection and belonging. And it talks to that idea of often a feeling of being a burden and not belonging leads to a sense of, if that festers for long enough, it can lead to kind of going down the road of suicide ideation and further on from that. So you belong, I love you, you belong in this family, or you belong in this community. And then things like emotional self-regulation and stress management, those are things that could be worked on with a professional. Okay, and that talks to the last point of prioritizing mental health. So seeking professional help, and I think destigmatizing the need for mental health support. Often teens, I think there's a misconception that there's something wrong with me if I need therapy, and it's really not. I often say to my adolescent clients, you're so brave to come and chat to me, and I'm so privileged that you would come and talk to me. So just destigmatizing the need for help. Then, as I said, always taking a teen seriously and showing authenticity and sincerity as they are talking through their pain. And for adolescents, because their brain is still very much developing, they might be anxious or feeling overwhelmed by something that to us as an adult might not seem like a big issue. But for them, in their world, it is a big issue. And so to show authenticity and sincerity to them, and I'll go through a few phrases that you can use to show this to a teen. Then trying not to show fear of the worst case scenario. And let's be honest, I think as parents, it's extremely difficult to suspend our sense of fear and anxiety when we are picking up that our child is possibly very depressed and is having suicidal ideations or has possibly attempted suicide. And to suspend those feelings of fear is very hard. But if you as parents can have your own safe space where you can process and show that fear, so that you're able to not show a sense of overwhelming fear, I think we can all be authentic with our children, and it's okay for them to know this is really hard for me to hear, but I'm committed to helping you is okay, but it's not to catastrophize our
Don't play with it.
and then to acknowledge and affirm feelings, and then talk about the possibilities for intervention together. Because sometimes our teens, they can't see a way out. And if together you can say, okay, let's walk this journey together. How about you talk to the school psychologist? If they're not keen on being seen with the school psychologist, okay, how about we look for someone outside of school? And to help them open up the option of other possibilities. Then the phrases I spoke about that you could use is things like, I'm sorry, I'm really sorry you've been feeling this way, or thank you for telling me. It's really brave of you to tell me. I appreciate that you trust me enough. You don't need to feel ashamed of this. I'd like us to think of ways to help you feel better. And could we look at other options besides suicide? And then to just simply say, I'm here for you. And again, I think as parents and talking to myself as well, we can often feel that in that moment, we have to come up with some incredible thing to say back to our children. But you don't. Just simply saying to them, I'm here for you. I hear you. I see you is enough in that moment. All right, so it's now almost 12:30. Cassie, I hope I haven't totally gone over time, but I'm going to now be quiet. So we've got half an hour for questions and comments. Cassie, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can explain to us how you want the rest of the half an hour to go.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you for really just unpacking that. It was really helpful, and I even learned so many different ways of just reframing it. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like finding different ways to talk about it. I'd love to do a Q&A because you've covered some really great things here. And I see the questions are already coming in, and that's always the important part, is to really get down to the discussion. So if you're comfortable, we could possibly do that first, and then I can always wrap up at the end with contact details and so forth. So one of the questions that we've also got from the work that we do is parents are often very nervous about talking about depression, and there is that myth that, you know, if I talk about it, I'm planting the seed. How would you suggest to a parent, how do they start that conversation with the teenager? When do they have it? How do they talk about it? Any advice there?
That's a very good question. So what I would say is, talking now specifically about teens, and you know, their developmental stage is very important to bear in mind, because as I said, their brain is developing rapidly, but it's still developing. And so I think if we take an invasive approach, I don't think that often works. I think when you take an invasive approach with a teenager, they more than likely are going to just close up. So I would suggest, if as a parent you are noticing a change in behavior, and there's a bit of a red flag for you that there could possibly be depression, I would start the conversation by just kind of, to use a metaphor or a visual, just to kind of gently open the door, not to kind of shove it open. So gently open the door by saying something to them like, I've noticed that you haven't seemed yourself lately, or I've noticed that you've been quite quiet, or you've been spending a lot of time in your room, or you've been quite emotional lately, and that's okay. But I just want you to know that I'm here for you, and if you need to talk to me, my door is always open. So obviously, you know, there's different levels though, Cassie. So, you know, if one is noticing very severe changes in behavior, or the child has, for instance, attempted suicide, or they are self-harming, not that that always means they're suicidal, but then one would need to take more, can I say, the word that comes to mind is more aggressive measures, but I hope you know what I mean, where one might need to take more pointed interventions than simply just gently opening the door. But so I would say, as the parent, you need to, one would gauge a situation. Or if a child is not willing to open up at all, then the option of saying, we're prepared to pay for you to go and speak to somebody that you would like to, that would be a safe space for you. We're happy to do that for you. Or therapy can be pricey. So things like organizations like SADAG are great because it provides a place where a teen could find help. Does that answer your question?
It does indeed. And I think what I really like is this analogy of, just gently opening the door and opening up that conversation, because it might not be in the first conversation you have that your child kind of unpacks everything and tells you how they're feeling, but it could just be an opportunity. And often we're not, always knowing when we should
Yes.
do we have a sit down? Do you do it while driving in the car? Do you do it around the dinner table? And I kind of advise, and I'd love to hear your insights as well, is that we encourage you to normalize those conversations. So you talk about it in the car, and even from like today's webinar, for parents to say, you know what, I actually attended this webinar today. It was really interesting. They were talking about depression. This is what I learned. Have you ever heard about it? Or have you ever known someone? And that could just be an entryway to find, gently opening that door and gently having that conversation. I think can be also helpful. So yeah, I don't know if you want to add any other insights about that.
Yeah, no, it's a very good point. I think there is a lot to be said about normalizing, as you say, and I think conversations around a dinner table or with a trusted community of people, it might not be kind of a nuclear family, but it's important, I think, for teens to have a space where they can almost check information. And I think because of this generation and the access to information that they have online, and that they're just a click away from a huge amount of information, and one doesn't always know where that information is coming from and how well researched it is. And so often teens can pick up ideas, and then they can kind of embellish on those ideas with friends at school and at break, and they can form ideas that, if are not checked within a trusted context, say for instance around the dinner table, or with a trusted group of people, where they can say, hey, you know what, at break today we were talking about this, or on TikTok I saw this. And parents can actually say, well, what I've read is this, or my experience has been this, and to kind of almost gatekeep in a way what our teens are being exposed to, but at the same time, as you say, normalizing it, that depression is not it's not a no-go topic. It's something that we talk about. It's something that is very normal to talk around. It's not like, oh my word, you said the D word, or you said you said suicide, and I think to remove that stigma is important.
No, absolutely. And I like that idea of getting used to saying the word so that it isn't this hush hush and they said that big word. And I think it's something we just have to get used to because of the stigma around that. Really, really helpful. Another question that's come through, and this comes in especially with all the parents, and we've got some teachers and youth educators who've also joined us today. Often teenagers are very nervous or uncomfortable to open up to speak to parents. What would you suggest then if they don't really want to speak to mom and dad about what's going on? What suggestions do you have, and how does a parent help facilitate that? Like where else can they go to get help, or how do you set that up?
So I would say, it's very normal just to say that in the adolescent stage of development, it is quite normal that they naturally pull away from parent or caregiver kind of influence, can I say. And this is, I think, really hard for parents because, often you dedicate your life to pouring yourself into your child, and then they reach a developmental stage where suddenly what you say is actually not that important, and it's more important what their peer group says. But I think on that question, to say to them, it's okay if you don't want to talk to me about it, but I can provide you with other people who you can talk to. So whether it doesn't have to necessarily be a professional if it's not at a stage where, a parent is really concerned about the level at which their child is at. But things like, I mean, in church communities, it could be youth workers that the child feels a connection with. It could be a teacher. It could be someone older in their life that they trust. It could be an older cousin, for instance. So I think the important thing is to not kind of scold the teen for not wanting to talk to you, but to say to them, it's okay, but here are some other options. Or if they just cannot verbalize, then to say to them, okay, can you put it in an email to me? Or can you write it down for me? Can you WhatsApp it to me? You use their way of communicating. Use that.
Yeah, I love that. And it's such a great idea because I think it also helps them to process and get time to really frame how they're feeling. So those are really, really great. Thank you for that, Lucy. I have another question here in the box. Do you find it often that children do not want to see the school psychologist? And I think you mentioned, not wanting to be seen at school, seeing the counselor. Why do you think that is? And what do we do? How do we fix that?
That's a tough one, Cassie, and I think I've experienced that firsthand because I previously worked in a school, and my office was right next to the high school girls' bathroom. So I was right in the middle of the high school, and I often had parents requesting that their children receive counseling, and the children, they just absolutely refused. And I think the reason for that is, look, not to put everything down to developmental stage, but it is significant because, a young child, my experience in a school, the foundation phase children had no problem. It was almost quite fun to come for counseling and to come for therapy. Whereas the adolescents, they saw it, not all of them, but some of them saw it as embarrassing and shameful. And again, it talks to the stigma, I think, of there's something wrong with me. You're going to see the shrink, shame, like there's something wrong with you. Or it could be comments from friends. And so what I used to do with some of my adolescents is I would see them after school hours. So the school was a lot quieter. The majority of the school had gone home, and they were then more comfortable to come for therapy. And so, how do you get around it? That was the best way that I knew in a school. Otherwise, the other option is to seek outside therapeutic help, where it's completely private. The child won't be seen by anyone at school. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I like the flexibility around it. And often, we've also found from the work that we do in schools when, pre-COVID, you could go and speak to learners and you can go to and speak to teachers, is that often the counseling room or the counseling office is really public. And a lot of people can see who's waiting in the queue and who's going. So often we advise kind of making it out of view, out of a busy place can be really helpful. And those are just some of the elements. Yeah.
So I also, what I actually did with some of my teens is I would, if it was available, there was another venue that was more private than my office. So that was sometimes I would go to that venue, but as schools go, it wasn't always available. So if it was booked, then unfortunately it was booked, and we were so short of space that my office, that was the only option I had, as I say, was right next to the girls' bathroom. So it wasn't an ideal location. So you're right, often offices, they're not well placed.
Yeah. But I think, again, also it's kind of just taking away that shame of talking about it, and therapy, that's a big thing. But again, normalizing that it's totally normal to do that, and it's actually really good for you.
Exactly.
So yeah, kind of tackling that as a parent as well, just to make it okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, for instance, saying to your teen, if they had a rugby injury or something, they would go to a physio or a bio, and to say, just as you might have something physical that needs work, mental health is as important.
Yeah, absolutely. And here's a really good question as well. And I know from your experience with working with teens and friends and families, how does a parent help a child when one of their peers are going through a really tough time and they go to the child in confidence? What would you suggest? How do you navigate that?
Yeah, that is a good question. And I've heard that a lot. And, it can be very burdensome for the other adolescent who's told the information. And in psychology, one of our kind of ethical principles is that we are obliged to breach confidentiality if someone alerts us to the fact that they are in danger of either harming themselves or harming someone else, or someone is harming them. And this is a very difficult situation, I think, because for another teen, they don't want to risk losing their friendship, or they kind of use that word, oh, you're such a snitch. I've heard a lot of them talk about it, don't be a snitch. And they fear bullying if they tell someone trusted that their friend is really depressed or suicidal. But I think it's important, I think, if another adolescent opens up to their friend, I think it's important that they get help. And yes, the risks are there for the child who tells a trusted person, but I think the consequences of that are slightly easier to manage than suicide.
Yeah. And we often say that, when we're speaking to teens and they're so afraid of, but they told me and said, I can't tell anyone, and they made me keep a secret. And we always say, the problem is bigger than them, and that they can't fix it by themselves. And it's better to actually save the friend than it is to save the friendship. And that's often when you've been told to keep a secret, that's kind of what you're thinking, is that I'm going to lose this friend. But if that person does get more depressed and more ill, they might die by suicide, and then you've lost them completely. So if they're still around to be angry at you for telling on, I think that's a good thing.
Yes.
And hopefully once they've got the right help, they could then get some clarity and actually understand that they did it for the right reasons. And I think, again, as a parent, that's a really good conversation to have around the table. And unpacking, definitely. Like, now, what would you do? How would you say this? So there's another a dinner table conversation to have, for sure.
Yeah, no, and I think I like what you're saying. It's better to save the friend than the friendship. And I would also say that probably in telling their friend, that is a cry for help. Even though they might say, look, please don't tell anybody, or we're not going to be friends if you tell anybody. And yes, that fear is very real for the person who's been told, but I think underlying that is a cry for help.
Absolutely. And that's actually really interesting, because there's a question that came up on the chat box as well, is that there's a child that talks about suicide to friends, but we're not sure if it's just attention seeking among peers or if it's a serious concern. And I know that you brought that up as one of your kind of myths around, being attention seeking behavior. How would you kind of navigate that, or any tips for parents?
So I would say, even if, so as I said, we would never take a child's comment as attention seeking or joking, but even if it is attention seeking, there's something beneath that, because then there's a need for them to be seen, and there's something underneath that. So even if the actual act of suicide is something that they're actually not considering, and a professional would be able to kind of do a bit of a risk assessment and ascertain, how at risk is this child. But, I would still say that they need some sort of intervention, because there's something driving that need to be seen.
Yeah, something must be like seriously wrong or going on for that person to think, if I threaten suicide, or if I talk about suicide, I'll get attention. And it's also important to let teenagers and children know as well, that if you're going to talk about suicide or threaten suicide, that there's pretty serious consequences, that there's interventions, people need to be told. And I think that could also help prevent people, especially in kind of social media and with celebrities who use, very slang terms when it comes to mental health. Oh, I'm so depressed, or oh, I just want to kill myself. And we often see this, but to kind of make it that this is a serious thing, and that there is serious help, and that we're not going to let a comment just slide.
No, for sure. And I think, to equip our teens to, if at break time, someone brings up kind of a flippant comment around suicide, is to equip our children with the vocabulary that they need to respond, and to say, like we talk about with our little kids, helping them develop an emotional vocabulary, but it's helping our teens develop a vocabulary around suicide, to say exactly what you said. I've been taught that we don't joke about suicide, and that it's not something to be taken lightly, and that if a person, we take a person seriously, even if they are covering it in a joke.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, it's a topic to discuss and unpack with your child, why it's important to get help and not just let that slide. So there's a long list now that I hope a lot of parents are writing notes of, like all these interesting dinner conversations to have, or while you're on the way to school, because I think they're really helpful. Lucy, I've got another question here, is how do you as a parent assist a child suffering with panic attacks, which only happens at school, but the child is happy at home? How do you navigate that, or any suggestions?
So so I have worked with that kind of a situation quite a lot in practice, and so often my experience, I found that can happen because a child, home is for some children or some teens, home is a safe space and it's a comfortable space. But school there could be many reasons why they're having panic attacks. There could be some anxiety there. It could be that they're perceiving school as unsafe, and I don't mean physically, but it could be that they might have experienced some sort of bullying, or they might be experiencing some issues within their friendship circle. They might be having a hard time with the teacher, but something in the school environment, and whether it's perceived or whether it's real, the anxiety is very real. So I often say it's, panic attacks, it's our body goes into protective mode. So basically your body is doing what it knows to do biologically to protect you from, your brain doesn't know, am I running after a grizzly bear in a jungle and I need to get the heck out of here, or am I just walking into the school grounds? Your body and brain are just registering threat, protect, and that's where you start to get the symptoms of anxiety and panic attacks and those sorts of things. So I think I've gone on a bit of a rabbit trail, sorry, but anxiety is one of my areas of passion. But so I would say, it would be important to have a conversation with the child around what is it, can you identify what's triggering you at school that's making you feel unsafe and that's making you feel threatened and like you need to protect yourself. And we take it seriously again, whether it is, as I said, real or perceived, because anxiety often, blows things up. So there is some reality in there, but often anxiety blows it up. And so school becomes this terribly unsafe, triggering place. And it could stem from a relatively small incident. Does that make sense? Sorry, I don't know if I answered the question because I went on a bit of a trail there.
No, I love it. And I think it also just kind of highlights that we need to do another workshop around anxiety in children, because there's a lot of kind of coping skills and ways to manage that. So I'll pre-book you for the next webinar on that topic, because I think that there's a lot that we can do. And if I can also just suggest to that parent who posted it, SADAG has amazing videos, short videos on our website that talk about like breathing techniques and ways to help someone in a panic attack. And you can use those same kind of techniques to help your child if they're feeling anxious or like they're about to have a panic attack at school. So definitely please go have a look at that. There's a lot of resources. But the next webinar for sure, we can tackle anxiety in children. I have another one here as well, and it's perfect timing with the matric results coming out and all this pressure of being a matric or exams. And how do you help your child with self-confidence or self-esteem, especially when they feel like they're not good enough and they can't do it and they're useless? Any tips of what a parent could do?
Sure, that is a big topic. And I think, self-esteem, and I've seen it in therapy as well, it takes a long time to build a strong sense of self and self-concept. But I think just some kind of basic things that parents can do is to try and reframe the way that a child sees themselves. So for example, if they say, I'm just not good at anything, for instance, to try and reframe it and say to them, but hey, let's think about a time, remind them basically of past successes. So things like, hey, remember when you did really well in that soccer game, or remember when you were so nervous about that public speaking evening at school, but you got up there and you did it. And so it could be the smallest thing, like, and it could be outside of school. So it could be things like, an extramural that they do or something, hey, remember when you got on that stage and you did your ballet exam? How did you manage to do that? So it's just questions that help them just reframe and get them to verbalize, oh yeah, I remember I was really nervous, but I still did that. Or it's also things like, okay, you feel that you're really not doing well at maths. All right, let's put how about we put some things in place? So whether it's extra lessons or tutoring, or if a parent can help with maths, let's do that. So you're giving them opportunities to build their sense of, okay, I actually can do this, it's not so bad. but I think, you know, as I say, it takes a long time to internalize and work on a sense of, okay, I am who I am, and I'm actually okay. I actually listened to a colleague was chatting about this whole thing of, you know, the good enough kind of principle, and he was just casting an interesting light on it, and he said, you know, by even saying good enough, there's still kind of a measuring stick there of what is good enough. But to help a child internalize, I am who I am, that takes away a sense of, I'm good enough, I'm not good enough, I'm this, I'm that, she's at a 5, I'm at a 6, you know. And I mean, you hear these terrible stories of, you know, young adolescents, you know, doing things like rating each other on social media, you know, like, how pretty are you? Oh, well, you are this and I'm a that. And so I think there's so many things that are fighting for our teen sense of self that if as parents, you know, we can just drive home, you are who you are, you know, you're unique, there's no one like you that's walking on this earth, you know, you are so unique and special, and, you know, yes, you might not be in the A team for swimming, but look at what you are good at. So it's constant just helping gently reframe, I think.
Yeah, I love that measuring stick and just that frame of good enough. Really, really helpful. Lucy, I could go on all afternoon because I find this incredibly fascinating, and the questions that are coming in are really, really great. And I just wanted to wrap up on a few things before we come to you for your closing comments, and then coming to the end of the session. So I just wanted to just quickly share some information, and I think also just share for parents, you know, that have joined, and also realizing that you don't have to be a mental health professional. You don't have to be a therapist to be able to start the conversation and to facilitate getting your child help. And I saw one of the comments that also popped up about what happens if you've got no resources. And this is, again, where SADAG comes in really helpful. And I want to show you some of the resources that we can help and make available to you wherever you are in the country. I think just to start off that conversation, you know, it's to asking questions and not being afraid to ask those difficult questions, listening and really listening. And I love that idea that Lucy mentioned about holding space, and just having that moment to have a conversation. You don't have to have all the answers, but you could just have a safe space where you can talk about these things, and then connecting to help. So ask, listen, connect. I think for parents, and again, we're speaking to the choir here, where you've already come and taken time to learn more about depression and anxiety and suicide. And I think that is a huge step in the right direction. So knowing the signs and symptoms of depression, as part of this pack or copy of the presentation slides, we'll also include a brochure around depression, the warning signs, what to look out for, and also being able to spot the signs for suicide. You know, we know that in 75% of people, and Lucy also mentioned earlier that do feel suicidal or have thoughts of suicide, have given off warning signs. And this could be in various shapes. Social media, it could be written, they could be talking about it, they could be sending goodbye messages. So if you spot any one of those signs, then you act and you ask those questions. I think also as parents and as adults, it's okay to trust your gut feeling, and being comfortable with saying something doesn't feel right. I have that little niggly feeling in my stomach. Ask the questions. It can't help to ask. The worst thing that's going to happen is your child's going to look at you and say, Mom, I'm actually totally fine. Please leave me alone. Or no, I just had a bad day. I'm okay. Please don't worry about me. I think it's just about having those conversations. So if you have that gut feeling, trust it, and ask those questions. Don't wait. Don't wait till your child ticks all the boxes before you say, actually, now I can ask the questions, or now I can get them help. Even if you spot one warning sign or one thing that worries you, reach out for help. If you don't know where to even begin, and again, no one gives you a guideline or a rule book as a parent on how to navigate this, but it's important that you also know you have support. You don't have to have all the answers. You can reach out. You can speak to the school. You can speak to your church, a clinic, even your GP. or pick up the phone to SADAG and we can help put an action plan together for your child. Don't be afraid to ask directly. Ask them, do you have thoughts of suicide? Have you had feelings of depression? Don't keep it a secret. Don't think that you have to fix the problem yourself. You know, as parents, we're total fixers. We see something that's wrong and we just want to take away the pain, take away the problems, or fix the problems. Sometimes just holding that space and letting them know that their feelings matter and what they're feeling is real can be a huge difference to making a teenager feel heard and seen. Don't brush off the problem. And we often forget as adults, you know, we were teenagers and it's really sucky. It's really difficult. And we go through different things. You know, when hindsight, we can look back and say, oh, there's so many fish in the sea. It doesn't matter if you go through a breakup. But for that teenager, where their world is so revolved around friends and socializing and relationships, whether it be relationships with best friends or boyfriends and girlfriends, or it's important to know that it's a really big deal to them, and to find out that meaning and to ask those questions. So even if it is a breakup and you know you're going to have the same breakup conversation many times again, it's important to validate and say, this breakup was really hard. Your heart is broken and I'm here with you and we're going to figure it out together. Lucy's already given some really great tips and tools of what to say. And again, starting that conversation, if you see one warning sign saying things like, I'm really worried about you because I've noticed that you don't want to go out with your friends anymore, you're staying at home all the time, or the music you're listening to just seems really out of the ordinary for you. Is everything okay? I've noticed that you haven't been yourself lately. How are you really doing? Please tell me more. I think these are just really interesting conversation starters. Often when we're stuck on how to have that conversation, this is how you start. I really want to help you and get the help that you need. Can we do it together? How you're feeling is pretty serious and you need urgent help. This problem is bigger than us. We need to get more help. Let's do it together. One of the things, again, it's about connecting to help all around you. And I saw some of the questions. What happens if you don't have money to see a psychologist or a counselor? Remember that there's lots of different options. And again, this is where SADAG comes in with our referral guide. There are hospitals and clinics that have psychologists, social workers, counselors, psychiatrists. They have resources available for free. Often it's tricky because you have to find out which day the psychologist is at the local clinic. That again, we can help you with those details. You know, we work very extensively on putting that referral guide and tracking all these different details. Finding out from your local GP what resources they have. You know, maybe they know of counselors. Don't forget, police stations also have trauma units. So they have trauma counselors available as well, or victim empowerment groups. They also have a children's section that normally deals with children's crimes or crimes against children, but they often have support services, chaplains, or even just counselors that can assist you. You can also work with the school's local district team, and they have a district team that make up of psychologists, doctors, counselors, social workers. So if you don't have resources, work through your school to activate that support system. Sometimes working with the teacher or counselor can be very helpful. So if you do notice that something is wrong with your child, they're not coping, speak to the teacher, make them part of your support network. Again, activate your support circle. If your child is more comfortable speaking to an aunt or an older cousin, get them to check in as well. The more support, the bigger your village to help your teenager, the better. Here's some information that we're going to share with you about what to do if someone is thinking about suicide, how to talk to them, and how to get help. All of this will be in your pack. What I think we can also do, and this will be information that you have, and I'm just going to briefly go through it, is if you do have a teenager who has perhaps had depression or has felt down, or perhaps they've even spoken about suicide before, here's a really great suicide safety plan that you can have in place. And actually, every teenager should have it. If they're ever feeling down or going through a difficult time, they have a go-to space where they can get resources to help them reframe how they're feeling. So some of the things that you'll see in your pack is just, you know, putting together a safety support list. You know, when you're feeling down, who are the key people that you can reach out to who, if you contacted, they'd be there to help you. What kind of distractions are really good to help change the way that you're feeling or thinking in that moment? And it could be playing outside, it could be going for a walk, it could be watching your favorite movie. But having a list, your go-to list, can just help when you're feeling down, knowing where to go. Here's some visual prompts. And this is something that you can either have on a piece of paper on the inside of your cupboard. It could be a box under your bed of things that just help make you smile. It could be pictures, drawings, poems, song lyrics, just something that your teenager can go to when they're feeling a bit stressed or down and help them to be calm. Here's a list of reasons to be living. And this is just really helpful, again, to reframe what a lot of our teenagers are going through. And when they're feeling down and they're feeling like they just can't go on, or they're feeling lower, or their self-confidence is down, here's a reason of all the things that they're good at, people that they care about, and things that they want to do. If any of these things don't work in that moment and they're still feeling down or suicidal, encourage them to speak to someone. And here's SADAG's helpline number. And I really do want to also just get you to the point. I'm just going to quickly go to this slide. Please, this is a time that you take a screenshot, take a picture of the slide with your phone. You never know when you need these free helplines. SADAG runs these various helplines 24 hours a day. We offer free telephone counseling. We do counseling over the phone and referrals to resources in your area, whether you have medical aid or money or not. There are various resources available. We also have various support groups around the country. Please take a photo, keep it on your phone, share it with family and friends. You never know when they need it. Make sure that your teenager and your teenager's friends have these numbers, because they never know when they're going to need it. We have a WhatsApp helpline that people can WhatsApp us and speak to a counselor live. And we even have an SMS number that people can SMS us and a counselor will call them back. It's more important to have these numbers and to have them available at your fingertips. Here we have a lot of SADAG social media followers or our handles, and we're not encouraging you to follow us on social media because we want the followers and we're all about the figures. But we actually want you to follow SADAG because every single day we share helpful resources, articles, videos, even invitations to future webinars, just all kinds of different resources that can help you and help create awareness around mental health. There's also really great things that your teens and your adolescents can engage with. So please do follow us on social media. It could really, really help. Some of the information that we're going to make available to you is that after this, we're going to upload the recording, a copy of the presentation slides. We're going to send that to you in an email along with an evaluation survey. We really want to hear from you. Did you enjoy the session? What was helpful? What topics do you want us to cover next time? We're going to be including brochures, posters, helpful handouts that could really help you navigate those difficult conversations with your teams. We also have an online toolkit on our website that you can go and visit with videos and articles, basically lots of information at your fingertips. There's also some helpful apps, and this is where we're kind of encouraging you as parents and educators and teachers, or even just those working at NGOs, apps that you can go to look after your own mental health. So putting your own oxygen mask on first, and then ones that you can get your teens to engage in as well. Calm, Headspace. There's so many really great apps that can help you just manage your mental health or your anxiety every day. You also have access to, on our website, to all of our previous webinars and videos, from how to understand depression to how do you talk to your teenager about it. Yesterday, we hosted a teacher's webinar. You'll have access to that information as well. So please go and have a look. The most important thing is that there's lots of help available, and we really just want to make sure that you've got that. To everyone that's joined today, thank you so much. I hope that this was helpful and interesting, and that you can take one thing from today that could help you feel more confident to speak to your child about depression. Lucy, I don't know if I want to just come to you for any last words before we end.
Sorry, let me just, Can you hear me? So yeah, just to say thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who joined. You know, and I think I don't presume to know all there is to know on this topic at all. And I think, as I say, just as a parent myself, I think the more we can collaborate together and share ideas and share resources, the better. And yeah, to work to destigmatize and normalize and have those conversations around the dinner table. You know, to say, you know, I was thinking while you were chatting, Cassie, you know, even to say something like, okay, we're going to have a family check-in, you know, and at the dinner table. So, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being I'm doing really badly and 10 being you know, I'm great. Where are you? And you go around the table. Mom has a turn, dad has a turn, auntie, granny, caregiver, everybody. And okay, you know, you're at a 5, so let's all talk about what's one thing that we can do to move 1 up our scale. So this is what I'm going to do. Mom, I'm going to move, you know, I'm going to do this to try get from a 4 to a 5. Or dad's going to do this to get from a 7 to an 8 or whatever. So that's just something I thought of while you were chatting, just a nice tool.
Thank you. And I think that's such a great way to also end, is that, you know, having this conversation together and like building that support within the family. I love the family check-in. And I really hope that some of the parents that have joined can try it out. And at our next webinar, we'd love some feedback and some tips and tools.
Yeah, definitely.
Lucy, just from me and from everyone, thank you so much for your insight and your really real, relatable ways of like tackling this hard conversation. I really, really appreciate it. So thank you very much for your time and for your information. And yeah, to all the parents and people that have joined us around the country, you know, and outside of the country, thank you so much. I really hope it was helpful. Please remember to reach out to us if you have any other queries or you need any help. There's also support for you. You don't have to do this alone. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone. Thanks, Nontando.